A very good afternoon to everybody. At the outset, I want to thank the organizers and especially Dr. Bala Venkat for inviting me for this wonderful conference. And I want to share with you that I am feeling extremely proud to see Bala Venkat rising higher and higher in the skies, because by God's grace, I had the fortune of being one of his teachers at BJ Medical College, from where he did his post-graduation. And only the teachers in the audience can understand my feelings. It is so wonderful to see one of your students rising so high. Thank you, Bala, for whatever you have done. Today I am supposed to cover what is new in PDPH, that is the post-dural puncture headache. So in short, I am supposed to describe the new bottle for the old wine. Because post-dural puncture headache is extremely old in the history. The history goes as back as the initiation of spinal anesthesia itself. And on the slide you can see the words in which Dr. August Bayer, who himself had the courage to administer spinal anesthesia to himself and to some of his colleagues, and they experienced a splitting, incapacitating headache after that, and these are his words in which he described the PDPH. The history goes back even before that. In 1825, Magendie had described what happens because of removal of CSF from the spinal canal. And way back in 1938, Schlattenbrand introduced the term alichoria to describe a patient of spontaneous intracranial hypotension, a new entity to which I want to draw your attention to, but as history suggests, it is not so new, but now there are many, many references. Post-dural puncture headache is a headache not only for the patient, but for the anesthesiologist, for the surgeon, and for the relatives. But I want to share with you that actually the center where I am working, the incidence of PDPH is really not that high, especially after we have shifted to the Whitaker needles, especially after the spinal anesthesia and the institution of the combined spinal epidural technique, even though the literature does not prove effectiveness of CAC in preventing PDPH. But as Dr. Raval had pointed out in the morning about the chronic pain, I think even about PDPH, there could be some genetic differences. I don't know exactly, some anatomical differences because of which PDPH is not such a bothersome problem in our country, but there are tremendous reports in the literature and we have to study what new things are happening about this PDPH. Now, as you can see from the slide, actually PDPH is not a separate entity, but it can be considered as a subset of intracerebral CSF hypotension, which results from low CSF volume, which is either because of real loss of CSF, like in case of PDPH, in trauma, or in the post-operative after the spine surgeries, or it can be idiopathic, which is called as the spontaneous intracranial hypotension, which is a very interesting syndrome, and lots of reports are coming in the literature about it, especially from the neuroradiologists, from the pain physicians, and more anesthesiologists are likely to be involved in the treatment of SIH. That's why I think we must know something about this spontaneous intracranial hypotension. And secondly, because the knowledge of this condition can help us understand the pathophysiology of PDPH, which is even today somewhat unclear. There is a very nice article in Anesthesia Analgesia 2011 about involvement of the anesthesiologist for a high thoracic or cervical epidural blood patch for the treatment of CSF hypotension, because we are considered the epidural experts. The incidence of post-spinal headache, I don't think it is necessary to inform the anesthesiologist crowd about. SIH incidence, true incidence is not known. It is pretty low actually, 1 in 50,000 to 5 per 100,000. There are varying figures. And here it is interesting to note that twice the number of females are affected as compared to males, and the same is true for PDPH also. We all know that there is a female predilection. And dural weakness and abnormalities is considered as one of the risk factors in the development of this SIH. And incidentally, as far as PDPH is concerned, again the same thing emerges. from the electron microscopy studies. We have been teaching our students, and we also have learned that the parallel insertion of the needle in the intrathecal space is important to prevent the postspinal headache, because we are separating the longitudinal dural fibers and not cutting it, because by cutting the fibers we will be creating a bigger dural hole. But that was based on the histological studies which suggested that the dural fibers are longitudinal, whereas now the electron microscopic studies are showing that there is no longitudinal placement of the dural fibers, but they are in a crisscross manner. And actually what is important is the thickness of the dura, which varies from individual to individual, and probably if the patient has a thinner dura, then there are higher chances of this development. Then there are many other conditions in which this SIH can be common, like connective tissue disorders. There was a discussion about Marfan syndrome in the earlier presentations about the Tarlov cyst because of the meningeal cyst. Now I don't know whether they are really the precursors of the SIH, but that's what the literature suggests, and that's why these patients, could they be more prone to develop PDPH if they come to us for anesthetic management? That is a point to be considered. The clinical picture of PDPH everybody is well aware of, so I'm not going to go in the details, but I just want to mention few things. We always presume that the PDPH usually occurs within 1 to 7 days, but there are reports about a very late occurrence of PDPH after an uneventful epidural labor analgesia, which occurred on the 12th day, and that's why it was considered that it is something likely to be something different, and there was a delay in the diagnosis. Also, the onset of pain. Usually the pain starts with it's a gradual onset, it is not a very sudden onset, but there is a report of a sudden thunderclap headache associated with PDPH, which usually is associated with subarachnoid hemorrhage, and that's why again in this case there was a delayed diagnosis. The clinical picture usually is because of downward displacement of the brainstem and stretching of the nerves, and of course even though we are fortunate to have a very minor self-limiting condition, PDPH can go even up to the case of encephalopathy. That's what the reports say. And the PDPH headache has been classified by International Headache Society as there are various markers: headache developing within 7 days, resolving by 14 days. Again, here I want to draw your attention to one thing, that there is an exceptional case report where the PDPH headache persisted for a long period of 7 years. Now, in the foreign countries, epidural blood patch is more commonly performed for the resolution of the symptoms, and when the patient has developed a PDPH, the patient is unlikely to give a consent for the epidural blood patch. That's why this patient hadn't given a consent, but she did not get a relief until she had an epidural blood patch 7 years after onset of that PDPH. Now coming to the pathogenesis. The pathogenesis of PDPH, there are two theories. The most common theory which we were told till today was brain sagging and stretching of the pen-sensitive structures and venous engorgement because of the intracranial hypotension. This venous engorgement is there because of the Mandrokelly hypothesis, and definitely there is a proof of venous engorgement because obviously caffeine has been used for so many years effectively. It is a cerebral vasoconstrictor, and that's why probably venous engorgement does occur, and now there is an MRI evidence of this venous engorgement. As you can see in the slide, there is a engorgement of the transverse sinus in the intracranial hypotension syndrome. Now what I want to draw your attention to is the second theory, the theory of increased CSF absorption. What the authors say that it is not actually the decreased CSF production or the CSF leak, but it is actually the excessive CSF absorption which is leading to the intracerebral hypotension, and that is because in some constitutionally predisposed individuals there can be excessive negative pressure in the IVC which is sucking blood from the epidural spinal network via lumbar collectors, and there is a marked negative pressure in the epidural space which creates a gradient of pressure between CSF and the blood, and there is sucking of CSF from the intrathecal compartment and excessive absorption of CSF. This negativity is obviously worsened in the upright position with the patient walking due to pumping of the lower limb muscles. That's how the PDPH pain worsens when the patient assumes upright position and when he starts walking. This is one MRI picture which shows the grossly negative, the collapse of the epidural space because of that gross negativity. The points in favor of this pressure theory are all procedures raising the venous pressure relieve the pain, lying down, prone position, abdominal binder. Even though the studies haven't shown great advantages of this, from our personal experience, There is a PDPH, usually this prone position and abdominal binder really helps to relieve the patient's pain. Then of course all procedures decreasing the venous pressure increase the pain, like upright posture and walking, so the patient feels good when the patient is lying down. And the most important evidence is that when a thoracic or cervical leak had been demonstrated by imaging before performing the epidural blood patch, and when the blood patch was given in the lumbar region, it immediately, dramatically relieved the headache. Now, the epidural blood patch can relieve the pain in two ways, either by increasing the venous pressure or by plugging the hole. But the plugging the hole cannot happen so fast, so that goes in favor of the pressure theory. This is a nice diagrammatic representation where you can see that with the institution of the epidural patch, the runoff of the blood to the IVC is prevented. There is reversal of the pressure gradient, and this effect is seen along the entire cord, and because of the temporary absence of flow through the leak, it might give some time for the tissue reparation and dural hole sealing. Because even in any fistula repair, we know that as long as, suppose there is a, I'm giving examples from surgical side, if there is a stone in the salivary duct, if there is a fistula, as long as the normal passage is not opened up, the fistula doesn't close. But here, there is no question of an abnormal and normal passage, but we have to, in short, we have to stop the leakage from that fistula's communication, and then that fistula can close. So the same happens here. When there is temporary absence of flow through the leak, the time is given for the body for the tissue reparation. Actually, closure of the dural leak should be aimed at when we are treating the PDPH. In experimental canine models, it has been shown that usually 8 days are taken for the closure, and fibroblastic reaction in the surrounding tissue is the thing which is most important in allowing this healing to occur, and that's why there are many reports that when there is accidental dural puncture, actually PDPH is more likely to happen in pregnant ladies, where accidental dural tap also is more likely to occur. And there are reports that if there is an accidental dural puncture, we can keep a small catheter in the same hole and continue with the analgesia, and this presence of the catheter helps closure of the leak by inflammatory reaction, but there are conflicting results about this fact. About the pencil point needle, we all know, it need not be proved again, that from our experience we know that as compared to the Quincke's cutting needle, definitely the incidence of PDPH is much lower with the pencil point needle. But the theory has, what causes the decrease has changed. Now they say that there is a less incidence of PDPH with pencil point because of the blunt trauma to the dura rather than the cutting trauma of a cutting needle, and because of which more inflammatory reaction sets in, and that's why the dural hole can get closed. And lumbar epidural blood patch also triggers an aseptic inflammation that seals the dural leak. So we have seen both the theories of the epidural blood patch, that is the pressure patch hypothesis, and direct sealing of the defect by inflammatory reaction. What has happened in the recent past, that because of the tremendous advance in the imaging modalities, lots of things are changing, scenarios are changing in the management, and same is happening as far as PDPH is concerned. There are many imaging technologies. MRI with contrast enhancement is the imaging technique of choice for this type of imaging, and Shevnik et al. Have given 5 findings in intracranial hypotension, which go by the acronym of SEEPS, where there is subdural fluid collection or hygromas may be seen, enhancement of the pachymeninges, engorgement of the venous structure, pituitary hyperemia, and sagging of brain. These are all the hallmarks of intracranial hypotension. Here you can see the subdural hygroma, which is complicated even by formation of a subdural hematoma, because there are reports that intracranial hypotension syndromes can present with recurrent subarachnoid hemorrhages, where the intracranial hypotension syndrome goes unnoticed and the patient keeps on getting treatment for the SH. Here there is a reversal after the institution of the epidural blood patch. This again is before and after the enhancement of the pachymeninges. There is clearance. This another picture showing the enhancement of the pachymeninges. This is the pituitary hyperemia, again before and after the epidural blood patch. You can see the difference. Sagging of the brain. There is cerebellar tonsillar, there is a supratentorial herniation, cerebral tonsils, they herniate, and because of this extent of the herniation, variations in the picture are produced. Whatever structure gets stretched, we can have that. And here you can see that the optic chiasma, which usually the line goes posteriorly and superiorly, has gone inwards because downwards.